Good morning, everybody. If you've just joined us, welcome to the Unforgettable presentation. And this is probably the furthest I've ever stuck my neck out on a webinar. I think I could only go one worse, which is how to give a webinar. But this one already feels pretty dangerous. So there we go. So the scheme for this morning's webinar is going to be something like this. I'm probably going to spend around about 30 minutes on the material. That'll take us to around about 10 o'clock. And then we'll have some Q&A for about 10 minutes. And then the summary, which hopefully will take into account everything, all the main bits, the real nuggets that I think are important from this morning, including stuff that you might have come up with. And then I will aim to finish at 10:15 on the dot. If there are more questions left over, I will stick around. So I guarantee that if you have a question and you post it up to us during this webinar, then you will get an answer out of me. So that's how this morning is going to pan out. So first of all, what is the problem with presentations? So what I want to do is actually to ask you to comment in the questions pane here. So the question I want to put to you is, what makes presentations boring and therefore forgettable, in your opinion? So Laura thinks the slides are too busy. People who just read slides, Victoria says that. The presenter, Gary, nice one, Barry, yes. Well, it might not be her fault or his fault, but the presenters can make it boring. Too much text, not enough interaction, Margaret says. Sharon says too much text is boring. Pat, boring equals too much text. Too many numbers in stats. Yuck. I hated stats. Too detailed. Kate, welcome back. Jackie M, repetitive. Words on screen and words spoken are the same. Yes, that's my pet hate as well. Too many PowerPoint slides, says Anne. Tony says no passion. Reading off the PowerPoint, says Jeff. Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, exactly. Oh gosh, I better not do that today. Not the slides themselves always, but sometimes the speakers, says Jackie. The lack of story, says Petra. I absolutely chime with that, or that chimes with a thought in mind, and you'll see more about that. Vicky, dull voice, lack of intonation. That's one I hope to stay clear of. No emotional connection, says Kate. Jackie again, lack of flair. Charlotte, lack of context. No picture, Andrea says. Long, says Tim. Not getting to the point. Or not getting the point. Waffle. Dry talk. My goodness, we could go on forever. Vicky says lack of clarity about the purpose and outcome. Sorry, back to the audience. Oh, I see. That was Jeff. A presenter who does not know his materials. Steve says yes. It's and Jackie again. No takeaways. So you have engaging slides, but nothing to refer to afterwards. And no interaction with the audience is another one. Thank you very much for all of those. And there's not one of those that I unfortunately can't identify with. The problem, as a number of you have pointed out, is that people use a lot of props, in particular PowerPoint, and I'll come back to that in a few minutes' time. And what they forget to do is to demonstrate their personality. They use words and behaviours that they would never use with each other. And something happens, and I sometimes do this when I'm running a presentation skills program. I'll get people just to stand up and come to the front of the room where I am and to start talking. And they behave completely differently. And they haven't even got a presentation to give. So something happens to us when we get to our feet. The problem is that the way we're put together, us humans are easily bored. So we want novel things. We like new things, but we adapt too quickly for new things to stay new. So the only thing that can keep us going that can keep us engaged is an interaction with another human being. That's what we need. We need somebody who's live in front of us. And then that person, if they have the personality, if they have a little bit of creativity, if they have passion, as one of you said, then something special can happen. So what I'd like to do is to get you to question the way that you present and what you use to convey your ideas, so that you sometimes, like me, can sometimes manage to give a presentation which is really unforgettable. So, the objective. Let's start with the objective. A couple of you also alluded to objectives. Now, I have a different way of setting objectives, and what I am particularly interested in fact, I'll say I am only interested in, is how I want somebody to feel. I'm interested in the feelings. Because if we can get people to feel something, we can get them to remember. At the extreme, there's something you may be familiar with called flashbulb memory. When something big emotional happens, we remember what was happening at the time. Now, we're not going to always be able to come up with the exciting material to enable us to do that. But if we focus on the feelings, we can do things that we have an objective. It's kind of like a vision. I want people to feel like this, so everything that I do, be it maybe happy or like optimistic. If I want people to feel optimistic, for example, about the performance of the company, then I will do things like, drawing in green. And I will draw shapes. I was looking at their presentation the other day, we were going through it. It was a mega presentation, the top 75 managers from around the world, big global organization. And he had a graph like this. In fact, the line was red and he was showing sales figures going up like that. And what bothered me was that actually there was any downturn at all. I said, take that out. They don't want to know that. And that's not the feeling you're trying to give them. You're trying to get them excited. And by the way, change the color of the graph. Now, we know that colors mean different things. And I don't know what you associate these with. I've just gone and drawn the French flag by accident, which is rather apposite. So, but red, we all know, is danger. Yellow even, and in fact, if I do yellow and then black, that seems to have a particular effect on us. And if you are scared of insects, this particular combination will remind you of probably a wasp or something like that. So the colours are really important. That was particularly brought to my attention when I was finishing off writing up my thesis, and a statistician I was working with, a brilliant mathematician called John, he said, Professor John said, look, be really careful about how you present your information. Your graphics have to tell a clear story. And he was the one who really pointed my attention to the use of colours and shapes and how much I showed. Also, we can use objects instead of words, and I think that for me is a very strong theme in the way that I present. I like to see something. I want something to look at, some stimulus. I can hook meaning onto an object. So getting people to feel is about, yes, it's about my self-expression. Yes, it's about the shapes I use, the colours I use, and the imagery I use. And I can fashion those as I'm thinking about my presentation to give people a particular target feeling that I want them to have. Here is a living example, in particular about words. I want to give you two examples of things that somebody might say in a presentation, and I want you to tell me which, or to figure out for yourselves which you think is actually the most interesting. Here's how not to make people keen to do something, I think. So you imagine now, for the sake of argument, that I am your director of sales. The donkeys, the stuffed donkeys in our store in Epping are going to start to decompose around about September next year because the warehouse is a bit damp, as you all know. So we're going to have to take some of them into all our territories, whether we like it or not. And the sooner we start, the better. Basically, there are 12,000 of the little buggers. So we really need to sell them next year, because if we don't, we're just going to have to chuck them away. Into landfill they go. And currently, these stuffed toys are tying up about 55 grand. So best effort, everybody. Option 2. Okay, this is Famous George, and next year, between you and me, we're going to find 12,000 homes for George and his brothers and sisters. Now, each sale will make us £5. George has a price on his head. Every single one of the 12,000 that we have is worth a £5. So, basically, you know that the warehouse is shot, and the sooner we can get George and his brothers and sisters out of the warehouse, the better it is for him and the better it is for us. So, which would you be most invigorated by? What's going to actually capture your imagination? The number of people who come on stage or into a presenting scenario with a very positive story, but let the negativity creep in, just isn't worth talking about. It is such a shame. So one thing I want you to look out for when you're presenting, or even preparing to present now, is what am I doing that might be invalidating or making my material boring or counter to what I'm trying to do. So I'm going to take you through 3 different areas to pay attention to. And there are 3 areas that I think you should pay attention to, which maximize the chances of you having the emotional effect that you want to have. So the first one is to be really very careful with what you choose, how much material you're expecting people to take in. Now, when I was preparing this particular webinar, I probably had, I was writing it on the train, and I reckon I must have had about, 25 different points to make. Right up until last night, I was still taking stuff out. I was taking it out because I noticed that I was getting confused, or there was some material that was jumbled up with other material. So right up until the last minute, I still found myself taking stuff out, which wasn't actually adding, and worse, it was actually making it less good. So first of all, don't be afraid of being really choosy and ripping out a half or a third or 2/3 of your material, because what you end up with will be really good. So that's about causing confusion. The other point here is also about not overloading people. We often overload. One of you said too much material. In fact, at least a couple of you said too much material, and that happens. So even if your material's interesting, even if you're passionate, even if you've got wonderful visual aids, it's still possible to overload your people. And I want to come on to specifically what happens in a minute, because there is a particular mechanism, psychological mechanisms that we're stuck with, which I'm going to mention to you. And the third thing that I want to bring your attention to in terms of material is interacting with it. There's a story that went around when I was at the University of East London, which involved a young chap at medical school. It was the first day of their lecture, and the head of clinical medicine, some professor, who he said, look, many of you won't be here in the auditorium in 4 years' time, and a lot of what we're going to ask you to do is about observation and attention to detail. And then he sticks his finger in a beaker of urine. This is the professor, and says, and so this is so what I'm going to show you now as a first off. Is how to test for diabetes in urine. So he sticks his finger in, and he apparently then sticks a finger in his mouth and licks it off, and he says, no, that's absolutely fine. He then gets a student from the audience to come out and to do the same. Of course, what the student hasn't noticed is that the professor stuck his first finger into the urine and licked his middle finger, whereas the student sticks his first finger in and licks his first finger, and of course actually has some urine in his mouth. The point here is that the professor played an absolute blinder, because he got the people in the audience to interact. He made an incredibly powerful point about so many different things by getting somebody out and by getting them to do an action that they would never ever forget. So that's a very extreme example. It happens to be one of my favorites, but it's a way of demonstrating that getting people to do stuff really, really works. And if you want to try and come up with a topic or material that you think, that doesn't apply to that. And we'll take that as a challenge jointly to see if we can actually find a way of making even the driest material interactive. So that's the material. So here are the words. Words, again, this is a big hobby horse of mine. I am always banging on to people about their words. And again, I'd like to get your view about your least favourite ones. Here are some of mine, some of the real horrors, I think. So what are your least favourite words? So mine, interface, reach out, touch base. Stick a couple in the pane now. Type a couple in. Any particular words that you think are really smack of corporate nonsense? Okay, I've got Andrew, no-brainer. Sharon, holistic. Hugh, bottom line, yes, good one. Johnny, leverage. Tim, synergy. Yes, that's an over. Steve Ross. Oh, I don't know if Steve is saying. He was telling me he hadn't. I wasn't engaged, but then he is. But I don't know if engaged is maybe one of the words. Sensible, Jackie. At the end of the day, pick up the ball and run, says Anne. Wipe its face, Tony. Donna says, get go. Andrew, no brainer. Yeah, okay. So yeah, there are some real horrors. Thank you very much indeed for those ones. So corporate waffle dehumanizes us. We don't use words like that at home. And so what ends up happening is that we sound like a corporate robot giving a presentation. I think when we're talking to each other, whether we're sitting down together or whether one of us is up front, it's got to be really gripping. And my litmus, and I often do this, my girls unfortunately are growing up, but I used to show them stuff when they were 6, 7, 8 years old and find out if they actually understood it. Did they get it? Because if they got it, I knew I'd achieved some success in the preparation. Corporate waffle kills interest and passion, and it also makes people skeptical, which is even worse. Plain language is believable because it's what we use when we have feelings about something. And as you said, one of you said, a couple of you at least, passion. You expect the person that is presenting to you to be passionate, to believe. When we use hollow cliches, we're not believable, because they're not the words that we use when we're impassioned. Okay, and so the third piece I want to draw your attention to is the story. So this is probably, I think, the most important one. And we can make some mistakes with our material. We can maybe have too much material. We can be a bit flabby with words if we find a way to tell the story. I mentioned a few minutes ago when I was talking about material that we've got to be really choosy. We've got to make sure that we don't have too much of it. And now I want to explain the science behind why that is the case. You may have come across a phenomenon or a psychological principle called the magic number 7 plus or minus 2. What does this mean? Well, essentially we have something called a visuospatial scratch pad. And this thing actually tells us or determines how many thoughts we can hold in our minds at any one time. Through extensive research, it turns out that most of us can hold between 5 and 9 pieces of information. The average, the median, obviously being 7. So what is happening there? Why is that the case? Well, the magic number 7 plus or minus 2 is the case because we actually have real difficulty packing things away. We don't know how to put them away. So we see and hear and feel lots of things. And unless we really try hard, most of us just try and throw everything, or our mind will just throw everything in higgledy-piggledy. And it then becomes almost impossible to find more than between 5 and 9 things very quickly. So I want to show you how to get over this by telling stories. But firstly, what I want to do is I want to run a little test with you, a little memory test. Now, these are the sorts of things that I absolutely am horrible at. I think largely because my mother never really made me tidy my room. She always did it for me. And so mine very much ended up looking like this. So what I'm going to flash up on the screen in a couple of moments is a picture which contains a number of objects. And without writing anything down, I'm going to give you 30 seconds looking at those objects, and then we'll see how many of those objects that you can actually recall. And then there's a second part of the experiment. Okay, so stand by with your memory, and here we go. Your 30 seconds with the objects starts now. Fifteen seconds left. Okay, that's your lot. So the theory is that if you actually try and remember a whole load of things like that, most people will remember 5 or 6. If you're particularly good at this kind of thing, you might remember more than that. So right now, straight away, see how many the names of the objects you can write down. Go for it, and then tell me in the Q&A pane how many you managed. And I'm going to give you about another 10 seconds to write down as much as you can, and then tell me what you managed to remember. How many? Okay, stop there. How many of you remembered? Okay, Victoria P got 9. Well done. Very good. Tony 8, Graham 7, Petra and Laura on 7, Tony W 8, Katrina 8, Vicky 9, Sharon 7, Anne and Steve 6, Charlotte 9, and Neil just has remembered one thing. Oops. No. Neil, you remembered 7. Well done. Lovely to see you, by the way. I haven't seen you on these things for ages. At Samantha 9. Very good. Interesting. I'm just quickly scanning the numbers again. Did anybody get any more than 9? Isn't that interesting? Yes, Hugh, you were one of the high scorers. So, and Victoria. So isn't that interesting? So if we were to run that thing again, here we go. Now I'm going to tell a little story and let's see how it goes. Okay, so here's the story which could stitch them together. So first thing, when I get up in the morning, The first thing that I see is my digital watch. It's a sports watch, and believe me, I don't get up at 16:58. And of course, the second thing I then see is a picture of my wife and Vianne when she was a tiny baby, which is absolutely wonderful. Often there are random things strewn around the bed as I get out, and this morning I actually trod on a stapler. I must have been doing a bit of work in bed the other evening, but anyway, there we have it. Anyway, on Saturday mornings, or typically what I do when I get out of bed is I get ready to go and play a bit of tennis. So collect, tennis balls, very important, obviously, and a good quality one. Often the cheap ones from supermarkets, they're like beach balls. They're about as much use because they go soft very quickly. And then whenever I go and play tennis, I always make sure that I take a couple of business cards with me in my racket case, because you never know who you're going to meet. Unfortunately, what tends to happen is the inside of the racket case can get rather damp. So I shove a bit of toilet paper in there, and that seems to keep the racket and my business cards dry. Unfortunately, my racket cover, because I've had it for so long and I'm in the habit of brushing it against things, when the racket, taking practice swings, I've created a couple of holes in the end. So I've taped them up and to try and keep the damp out. And of course, in fact, it was a couple of Sundays ago when I went to play, we had to be very careful to not play beyond 11 o'clock, or because obviously it was Remembrance Sunday, and I wanted to make sure that we observed that correctly. And obviously after tennis, every time it's always has to be a cup of coffee and a bit of a relax. And of course, boys being boys, I tend to play with boys. Someone who always has some sort of gadget to show off, and my Swiss Army knife is certainly one of my favourite gadgets. Now, you can imagine that it's probably, if I said nothing for 10 or 15 minutes, or maybe if I ask you right at the end, how many objects can you remember now? Even if it's 10 minutes away, you may find that you remember a lot more. So no matter how stupid the story, we can still actually make a big difference. In fact, Tony reckoned he remembered, I don't know if he just remembered 12 as a result of the story, or whether he actually remembered 12 originally. So the point here is stitching things together overcomes the problem that we have with our visuospatial scratch pad. We can get over that whole magic number 7 plus or minus 2 when we concatenate. That's a bit of psychobabble. Concatenate, chain together the different bits and themes, and that seems to work really, really well. Okay, so no piece on presentations would be complete without an allusion to the dreaded. So here's a little piece for all you PowerPoint lovers. If you must, I have a little presentation that I put together for you to just point out the main things to go towards or avoid. First of all, if you must use PowerPoint, don't use some tacky background. I've got to say that there are some absolutely wonderful themes on there now. There really are. The problem is that they're a bit too good, and that they will compete with you, and especially with your material. So don't be tempted to use the really good stuff. Clip art. I'm glad to say I think they've even taken it out of Word now, but it's still around and I still see people use it. Try not to. Instead, photographs. I love good quality photographs, and every now and again I search out one. And this old boy I used for something. I can't even remember what it was, but I used this photograph because I thought his feelings were ambiguous. I couldn't tell whether he was bored or pensive or sad, and I just think it's a fantastic, evocative photograph, and I never tire of looking at it. I can invent stories about this guy and where he's been and what he's done, where he lives, what nationality he is, how old he is, and so on and so forth. So a good photograph, a great image, is actually worth using. If you can't have the object, at least get a decent image. Bullet points. try and cut out or eliminate bullet points. This is a bit from the beginning of my screen. Instead, the 3 of those bullet points, incidentally, were about how Nicola could help you. So an image you have there and just a little instruction. And of course, use the fewest number of words. I set myself a little target. I never use more than 9 words. So there we have it. I think I've used a lot less than that, 4, 5, 6, 7 words and some symbols. Obviously, this one is recording, and this one is if you have questions or a problem, bring it up. Just stick your hands up and you can ask questions at the end. Transitions. This is the cracker. Lots of special effects, and in fact, as I said before, the special effects in PowerPoint now are better than ever, but oh my goodness, are they distracting. So here's a couple of brilliant transitions. Look at that. I mean, that's just gifted, but again, it's totally detracting from the material. So, if you are going to use things, be really careful. That's a more conservative one. I can live with that one. Because it's not fancy, and it adds a bit of polish without actually detracting from the material. That one is fabulous, but it's way over the top. So anyway, that's what I have for you on PowerPoint. If you must, as I said, if you must. Okay, any thoughts, questions, reactions that you have about what I've said? Here we go. Victoria, if you work in a corporate where people want lots of detail on PowerPoint, what is your advice? Well, I think Neil's been on one of my sessions, and my advice, as he probably remembers, is put it in a handout. You can allude to the fact that there's more detail, and what I think is a really interesting way of including a lot of detail without including a lot of detail is to give people a little piece of all of the sections of detail that you've got. Give them examples and then make them hungry to want to go and find out more. This tends to be an approach which some of the best lecturers in university, if you any of you think back to your university days, the best ones actually whetted your appetite so much that you wanted to devour the reading list. Lectures were not for learning, they were for stimulus and for posing questions. And I think good presentations probably pose a lot of questions and make people eager to find out more. Hopefully that is good enough. Andrew, what presentation are you using, Paul? This one here is actually called Sketchbook Pro. A Sketchbook Pro, it's incredibly cheap. It takes quite a lot of practice, but a very nice chap called Kevin Holligan, who used to be at Mars, and I worked with there, and then he and I have seen quite a bit of each other when he's been in different places. But he really taught me a lot about how to use Sketchbook Pro, and taught me the tricks, and so yeah, that's what I use, and I swear by it, Andrew. I think it's an interesting thing. You can import graphics into it, and I think it really helps. Any advice to a friend who is a little introverted? Yes, Tony, and I was hoping somebody would ask this. I haven't covered the whole emotional piece about the presenter and how some people feel who are stepping out. I think the best way for somebody who is introverted, and I think people who tend to be quiet, if that's what we're talking about, introverted, or feel embarrassed in front of groups, or awkward, or very self-conscious, number one rule is to totally be themselves, to try not to be anybody else, because I think people who come on quietly and without lots of pizzazz actually make very engaging presenters. And the second thing I would advise is to actually admit the awkwardness. And I do that almost by default now. I was giving I had a gig, a speaking gig last week in the city to 60 female chartered company secretaries. A formidable crowd. They were so nice, but I couldn't help. And I was talking about self-confidence, and I mean, it's a double whammy, isn't it? You get up and you're not feeling 100% confident, and you're talking about self-confidence. So I just came straight out with it. And actually, that does boost your confidence immensely. It lets the cat out of the bag. It's a brave thing to do. So that's what I would say, Tony. Jonathan says, you haven't said anything about the presenter's energy. Yeah, I haven't. I suppose the two things. One, know your stuff, as somebody said earlier on. And secondly, you have to want to be there. You have to really believe what you're saying. Somebody's bound to now come up with the question, what happens if I don't believe what I'm talking about? That is probably the hardest of all. I would probably say just keep it very brief and stick to the facts. And pick out some things that you really do believe in about the message and emphasize that. Tim, what would you say was the ideal length for a presentation? This one here is now into its 40th minute. I think that's probably too long. I've let myself off the hook and I've broken lots of rules of my own rules that you've probably noticed because it's a webinar. But if you were in the room with me, we'd be doing stuff together. So if I was going to go this long, we would be doing a lot of things together. People coming out the front. The lectures that I give or whatever presentations tend to be very interactive. I always bring something up to the front. I always get them actually doing a piece of behavior. I reckon 30 minutes is pretty much on the spot, even if you're interesting. Okay. It's 10 past 11. There are quite a few questions yet to do. So as promised, I'm going to now do a little summary just in case you need to get away bang on at 10:15. And then those who don't have such a heavy schedule, then you can stay on afterwards. So here's the grand summary. Firstly, be yourself. Don't be a robot. Use your own language. Use your words. As for the rather introverted person that Tony's talking about, be themselves. The second thing is be brief. People love it when we respect their time. And as to pick up on what Tim said, if you have maybe 1 hour, be really conservative and just use that first bit and give people 15 minutes to show you that they're either interested or that they're dying for a break. And lastly, I would say be real. Use objects. Use real things. Well, draw things at the time. Silly cartoons, even if you can't draw very well, and pictures. It brings it alive. People feel that they're there at the beginning of the presentation, like they're in your thoughts. So if you're prepared to be scruffy and maybe a bit halting as I have been, trying to collect my thoughts, trying to press the right button and move my arms and legs in the right place, it's a much more genuine and engaging way to be spoken to. And hopefully people will remember. Well, I believe they will remember. So that's all I have for you this time. I just want to put in a quick advertisement for the new year. In the new year, we've got Friday, the 22nd of January is our first webinar of the year. So put that in your diary. I don't know what the topic is yet, but if you'd like to suggest one, that would be absolutely fantastic. It's always great to get suggestions. In fact, the most successful topic that we've run this year was suggested by one of you. Actually, I've got to say, I felt really nervous about the topic when it came up. It was how to manage upwards. I was nervous because it was so cliched. It was potentially really manipulative. It made assumptions that the bosses and their reports probably had a lousy relationship and all sorts of things. But I stuck to it and I really tried to get some good material together. I wrote the blog and put that out. And we had more people booking in for that webinar than anything else. So yes, keep the topics coming. So it's now 10:14. If you can stay on, I'm going to go back to some of the questions that I didn't manage to answer before. So let me just scroll back to that screen. Okay, Tim, how do you avoid interaction and questions knocking you off course? Interesting question. I like questions and interactions. as you've realised, Tim. I would prefer getting knocked off course, I suppose, than being boring or not memorable. In front of me, I have my trusty IWC. I think it's a knack that you develop of keeping an eye on the time. Rehearsal helps. I don't over-rehearse. I go through the material a couple of times, otherwise I go nuts. But I think having that, that's probably another awful phrase, internal compass. I have this internal stopwatch, and I also know the map of the material. So I know, I even write on here, you'll see here, I don't know if you can see that, I've written on what time I need to be at a certain point by. So I have mileposts, timing mileposts to keep me on track. But I think better to be diverted than to be boring, Tim. Thanks for the question. Using position on stage to signal content. Frank, that's a really cracking one. I coached somebody a couple of weeks ago. It was the same person who was giving the mega presentation to the 75 top leaders, global leaders, and he was going to give a very competent and fine presentation. And then, but what he told me that he was following the marketing department on, who had their agency put a fantastic all whistles and bells, flashing lights presentation together, music and all that kind of stuff. And I said, look, we've got to do something about that, because you're 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you're one of the last people on, and you're talking about strategy. Bang. And so we got him all sorts of little tricks. Like he was in darkness for the first 3 minutes of his presentation, so that people were just hearing a voice and seeing some single very large images projected on a wall about the place that they wanted the organization to be. And then there were 3 pools of light across the stage, each with a scruffy cardboard box at the center of the very sharp circle of light, and in each box he had an object or a series of objects that helped him to tell the story. They were basically business case studies, and in the boxes he had different objects that represented the brands that he was talking about. And it was basically saying, we're not going to do it like this bunch of people, but we are going to do it like this bunch of people. And that's what he did. And so he walked across the stage, and it also helped him to remember where he was in his presentation. Lots of eye relief, lots of amusement, lots of very ordinary, mundane objects, giving a very powerful impression that, strategy is solid, it's plain, it just sent all the messages that he wanted to in a very low-tech way. So the perfect antithesis. So the movement on stage, that's a fantastic prompt, Frank. Thank you for that one. Are pictures wrong? Asks Andrea. No, pictures aren't wrong. It's just that be really careful what you choose. I try not to use people at all. Pictures of objects, fine, fields, fluffy lambs. I try to keep people away because they're a distraction. Keep people out of it, because everybody says, oh, people don't really look like that. They're all models. So no model photography at all. I try and take pictures myself, like the hand on the bullets. That was my hand against my office wall. So I try and do as much homemade as possible. And again, that's an extension of my own personality. Pictures again. Any different advice from Victoria? Any different advice for presentations given over the phone, which seems to be becoming the norm? Wow, yes. Yes, there is a piece of advice here. Send everybody a sheet with, like the cheat sheet that we have. It's in the handouts pane. If you haven't got it yet, download that. And it's a blank. And what I do is I imagine that some people will fill it in. They'll scribble down things that I've said, or they'll a picture. And then we send the completed cheat sheet out tomorrow. Well, no, not tomorrow. Nicholas says not on your Nelly. We'll send the complete cheat sheet out on Monday. And that has all the words and pictures. So that's what I would do, Victoria. Get people to give people something to do when they haven't got your sunny face in front of them. Andrew, handouts could be a way of keeping them to the end. Yes, it could be a way of keeping them to... I'm not sure if, Andrew, you're saying keep the handout to the end, or it could be a way of keeping them to the end. If you're going to give a handout that is completed, I would give that at the end. I think I'm probably torturing your meaning, but people have an awful and soul-destroying habit of rifling through handouts when they come to a piece of your presentation that hasn't quite grabbed them. So handouts, I hand out at the end, unless they're partially filled in and I want people to fiddle with them, in which case I'll give them a partially completed handout at the beginning. Roberto, that's a fantastic name, Mr. Roberto. With so little on paper, how much notes do you use? Slide text, if anything, gives you a prompt to your storyline. Yes, I do use notes. So I have a very complete script here, which tells me what I'm supposed to be saying and what's supposed to be on screen. So I go very complete. When I'm standing up and walking around, I have to really anchor myself to my notes. I stick them up with blue tack. So I do use a lot of notes, but then when I'm feeling good, I will then find I forget to look at my notes and I'll go off. So the notes maybe just as a springboard for me. Positions on, I think Frank said, what about positions on stage? I think positions on stage are great. Actors do that to help them to remember the script. You do what's called blocking on stage, where you walk to different bits, you pick up certain objects. So objects are fantastic anchors. The problem with using a presentation as your script, or even alluding to it, is that you will find that your gaze goes behind you a lot of the time and you end up talking to the screen, or worse still, pointing to it, or even worse than that, reading it off. So be really, really careful, Roberto, with the screen. What else? Vicky says, a great reminder on not using corporate speak, but sometimes some corporate speakers feel that your presentation isn't professional if it doesn't have all the awful buzzwords in it. Send them to me afterwards, Vicky. I don't know about professional. Yes, I wonder, do people think we're less professional if we don't use the buzzwords? People might think we're not on the in-group, but then I suppose we need to decide whether we want to really be on the in-group, or do we want to be standing outside it, like the errant sheep who has decided not to follow the track. Getting all metaphorical and spiritual there, Vicky, but yeah, good point. Some of us are stuck with corporate words. Andrea, how can we transfer the message with operatives who didn't have the right level of high level of education? So I think you're saying, Andrea, that some people who you are speaking to don't have a high level of education, rather than the people you're speaking to are going to have to pass it on to others. In either case, I think everything I've said this morning applies. Keep it really simple, like a 6-year-old can understand it. I'm not saying that even uneducated people are often brilliant, but we don't give them the opportunity to, just because they're not formally trained to adapt their minds to the sort of nonsense that gets spoken in many, not just presentations, but also training sessions. Some training sessions are absolute torture. And even apparently the soft skills things, people have systems for listening and for asking questions and all that kind of stuff. And I think they're just disastrous because they're far too complicated, and half of it's not even true. So what I would say, Andrea, in fact, yes, it looks like you are Italian. So Andrea, so it might not be Andrea, it might be Andrea, it might be a boy. Don't know. You have to correct me on that one. Is to keep it simple and impactful, and it doesn't matter what the apparent educational level of your audience is. They will get it, and they will thank you for being an engaging presenter. Okay, I think we've got through all the questions there. Thank you for, over half of you, almost half of you stuck around right to the end. So thank you so much. I hope you have a terrific afternoon, wonderful weekend, and a great festive season. Again, thanks for joining, and I will see you in January on the other side. Thank you to all of those who asked questions and told me when I was and wasn't being engaging. All right, take care. All the best. Bye for now.